Welcome back to under 450K, and I've got yet another location for you guys to consider investing into. And it's a topic that's pretty rapidly rising at this point in time within the property sphere, among Facebook groups, among property chat, among Reddit groups, and etc. And the location that we're talking about today is Darwin, and more specifically, not just Darwin in itself, but I'm looking more at Palmerston. And the reason I'm looking at Palmerston is because it's sort of under that one under $600,000 mark and close to $500,000, and you might be able to find some properties under 500K, but it's getting pretty rare pretty fast. And listen, if you're new to my YouTube channel, what I do is I present you the data, I present you my thoughts, my opinions, and what I want you to do is actually take my thoughts, my opinions, the data that I show, take it, think about whether it fits your criteria and your profile and your risk strategy, and decide whether or not you want to invest in that location. I will never, ever, ever push you towards a certain location to go invest into because every single person's investment property journey is different and does not work the same for every single person. Now, what I want to do is start to deep dive into Palmerston. And the very first thing I always like to do is look at the data of a location. And where I actually look at the data for the location is on hashtag. I do have a referral code which I'll put down on the screen, which you can go in and use, and you get 25% off the actual plan of hashtag. And so when we start to look into Palmerston, we notice the buy price is around 584K for all these locations in here. And you can get anywhere from about 450 up to about $600,000 and a bit more than that as well. And the very first thing I always like to look at, and I'm going to pick a couple of suburbs here, which include Woodruff, which is a smaller location here next to Grey, next to Malden, next to Driver. And when we start to look in detail about Woodruff, I'll get to these typical prices a bit later. But when we start to look at Woodruff, we look at the important metrics, which is always supply versus demand. And when we look at supply, we can see supply has been flatlining and it has been dropping in the last couple of months with a slight little uptick, but not that much. But it has been dropping in the past couple of months. And we can see days on market has stagnated in the past couple of months, and interest has been picking up in this location. We can see inventory is been reducing for the past year or so. Vacancy rates are extremely low, sitting around 1%. Building approvals are virtually non-existent. But the interesting thing that we see here is that in the last year, in the last couple of quarters, we can see that the search index and the number of searches happening for buying slash renting in Woodruff has been increasing, which we like to see as an investor. And these trends are similar across the other suburbs, including Driver, where you can see the price is a bit cheaper, around 480K. When we go down to the supply demand metrics, we can see stock on market is reducing. Days on market, we can see some anomalies which aren't great. The data isn't very clear nor is it consistent, but it's something that we can look at and we can make a decision about. It's sitting around 86 days, which is, quite high, I would say. And when we start to look at inventory once again is reducing rapidly and vacancy rate once again is extremely low. We can see that the search index is increasing as well, which is all good signs that a market is starting to heat up, it's starting to warm up, and eventually will turn into what we like to call a hotspot market, much like Townsville, much like Mackay, etc. And this is also reflected on other suburbs as well, within Grey, within Malden, within other suburbs like Rosebery as well, and even in some locations near Anula, Malak, etc. Now that gives you a quick rundown on the supply versus demand metrics, but I personally already know that Northern Territory, Darwin specifically, is already beginning to heat up amongst the property chats among investors, and this has actually been reflected in articles already. Right? Investors pounce on Darwin's cheap homes and high yields. Darwin has cheap homes around $550,000 or less, and it has extremely high yields sitting around 7%, right? And that's something we saw in Townsville, something we saw in Gladstone, something we saw in Perth, 3 years ago. But there are a couple of important things that we need to know about Darwin before we actually go into invest in a location like this, especially for the new investors who might get caught up in the hype and the FOMO. And the first thing is we say investors pounds, but let's go into this article. Sale prices have shot up in this one city in the past few weeks, with buyers coming in heavy, giving house prices around $510,000. For the last 6 years, there hasn't been much investor activity, and about 95% of our buyers were owner occupiers, he said. Now it's 60% owner occupiers and 40% investors. They are coming in heavy in the last 6 weeks. This is a very scary metric to me personally. 40% of investors are now buying into the market. Another key line is at least a third of our deals are off market, and a lot of these transactions are through professional buyers agents. So now we know that investors are buying in the area, we know that buyers agents are buying in the area, but we have to ask ourselves, what is causing this change and why are investors suddenly pouncing on this market? And you may be wondering why there is so much hype around this area, why there's so much demand around this area all of a sudden when it didn't have any growth for a very long period of time. And we can see that in the past 10 years, there has been virtually no growth. And in fact, it has had negative growth in the past 10 years, sitting at minus 1.1%. So then why all of a sudden have we seen a sharp uptick in price? But before we go any further with this video, if you do need that tailored advice, you want that exclusive content, you want that private community to help each other actually grow our investment portfolio, then you should definitely join under 450k. With just $35 a month, you get access to all exclusive content, to our weekly community calls, my analysis method, the private community, and other extra links and resources. And it's literally just about $1 a day. It works out to be $1.16. I rounded it down to $1 a day. And we also have the 3-month plan, which is $85 per 3 months. That should last you a pre-approval, and then you shouldn't be in the community anymore. That's how I structured this plan. That's how I structured this community. But if you don't want to pay $16,000 for a buyer's agent or $5,000 for a property course, then this is the community that can be for you, and it will be able to give you that tailored advice, right? We have all these features of 24/7 chat, my analysis, exclusive content, my suburb watch list, weekly community calls, and there are free resources and templates. And we have a bunch of little reviews as well down here showing the value of the community, right? So make sure you are subscribed to the community, because you could be missing out on valuable information that could make you tens of thousands of dollars. So make sure you hop onto under 450k. Now I also have a newsletter with hundreds of investors currently subscribed, where I go through each individual suburb and break down its location, its economic diversity, the suburb metrics, the data analysis behind it, and I give you such in-depth detailed information for absolutely free. So make sure you are subscribed to that newsletter, because it is only beneficial for you, and I upload a new article every single week. Let's get back into the video. And after talking to a lot of agents on the ground and asking about what's causing the change, and one of the most important changes that happened in Darwin, or in Northern Territory, was that the CLP won. The 2024 election has changed things in Darwin. And since then, and it's been coming for a while, but a lot of new investment projects, the Middle Arm, Copper Mining Alliance, and various different projects, including defense, are all coming to Northern Territory. And this is all causing a shift in the mindset of the investors within Darwin, the people considering Darwin. And we can see this sort of investment here, where the federal government spends up to $18 billion on the North Australian defense bases in the coming decade. So there's about $18 billion over the next 10 years coming into Northern Territory. But despite all this investment and this new hype into Northern Territory, we need to go back to the fundamentals of analyzing a location, look at the economic diversity of the area, look at the socioeconomics of the area, and understand, do people actually want to live there? When we look at Palmerston, or when we look at a case suburb like Woodruff, where we see property locations under $550,000, we have to look deeper into it. And so when we zoom out and we look at the location, we can see huge periods of negative growth. We had a bit of negative growth in 2009, in 2010, 2011, and then after 2014, we've had a major failing, or a major house price drop, you would say, all the way from about, $500,000 to about $400,000. So as an investor considering Darwin, then I would ask myself, why has there been negative growth in Woodruff during those years? And why between the periods of 2014 and 2019 have we had 5 years of negative growth? Meanwhile, when we look at a location like Edmonton, which is in Cairns, what I talked about in my other video previously, we can see that this location, even though it has been stagnant for a very long period of time and had only very small increases, it has barely had any periods of negative growth. We can see something very small in 2011, but apart from that, it had almost virtually no negative growth. And again, this comes down to the fundamentals of a location. And so when we actually zoom out a little bit and look at the LGA level of Palmerston and we start to go down, we can see that it has a population of about 40,000 people, 17,000 homes, a good infrastructure spend of $1,100 within the area. We can see the typical price has gone through its changes, but there are more things we can look at. And the number one thing that concerns me is the fact that it has a renter to owner occupier ratio of 45%. And by the way, when we say renters to owners, it can really be reflected as investors to owner occupiers. So there are about 45% of investors already within that area. And this comes back to my point is that Darwin is a well-known transient city. People come there for work and then they leave there, right? They come into Darwin, they work a lot, they make a lot of money, and they leave Darwin because it's not a nice place to live. Now, personally, I don't know what it's like to live in Darwin. I've never been to Darwin. Do I think I'll ever go to Darwin? Probably not. But the fact that it is a well-known aspect that Darwin is a transient city makes it a slightly more riskier location to go in and invest into. Despite having such high-paying jobs in Darwin and the fact that houses are extremely affordable under 30 years in Darwin, we have to ask ourselves, why don't people want to live there? And we have to come back to this article and ask ourselves, why is it all of a sudden that investors are the one that are driving this market? And it could be due to a multiple number of reasons. Of course, there's the investments in infrastructure, defense spend, the fact that house prices are so low. But it also comes down to the fact that, like I said, house prices are extremely low, yields are extremely high. And the people who couldn't secure a property in Townsville, in Mackay, in Cairns, the people who have missed the boat on Perth, they're looking for that next location where prices are extremely low and yields are extremely high. But the core metric and the core difference between, I think, a lot of these locations and Darwin is the fact that people actually want to live in these locations. People want to live in Townsville. People want to live in Perth. And by the way, guys, even though Darwin is quote unquote a capital city in quotation marks, it only has a population of about 150,000 odd people. And when you really put this into perspective, we can see that Geelong is bigger. We can see that Hobart is a bigger city. We can see Townsville is a bigger city. Cairns and Toowoomba are all bigger and vaster populations in terms of size compared to Darwin. And that should also change the way you look at investment into Darwin in your mindset. Darwin is more like a regional city, to be quite honest and quite frank. And now you may be sitting here wondering, this guy on YouTube is being very negative about Darwin, even though Darwin house prices are starting to go up in value. Investors are buying in this location, people are more interested, there's more infrastructure, there's more defense spend. Again, I want to be very clear. I'm not telling you whether to go invest into this location. I'm not telling you whether not to go invest into this location. I'm giving you the facts, the figures, and the data, and then you can make a decision about whether or not you want to invest there or not. And then you have to also ask yourself this question is like, what type of investor am I? Am I a short-term investor or am I a long-term investor? When you look at the historical graph of Palmerston, and you said, I want to hold this property for the next 10 years, the next 15 years, the next 20 years. Looking at the economic diversity, the socioeconomic factors of a location, you'd have to ask yourself, is this a good location for me to invest into long term? Or am I just happy with short term growth and then I can just get out and sell the house in Darwin? As an investor, when we invest into locations, we want to be investing into location where owner occupiers are the ones driving the market. The last thing we want is investors to be driving the market because that causes a bubble. Because if investors leave, then house prices will drop. And you have to understand is that when there's already 45% investors in an area, if we have another cycle pushed by investors, what does this percentage come up to? And how much of a risk are we taking by investing into a location like this? Now, if you're looking for short-term growth and you want to ride the wave, you buy a $500,000 property, it goes to $650,000 and then you sell it, then you could do very well for yourself. But most investors don't want to invest for the short term. They like to be long term investors. They like to get in and just hold the property for a long time. And that's where the socio-economic factors become so important. It's economic diversity. Does people want to live there? Is it affordable location for people to live in? Is there always going to be jobs in the future? These are all important things an investor must consider when choosing a location to invest into, not just the short-term hype. Now, another really important thing I want to mention is not just apart from the data and the sort of metrics and what you should consider is if you do want to go to Darwin and you want to invest into Darwin, I need you to make sure that you contact local agents within the area and you ask about what are the bad pockets, what are the good pockets of investing in a location like Palmerston City, because Darwin is well known and it has very high crime rates, right? They have break-ins, they have carjackings. You should be buying a property that has an alarm system. You should make sure that you have the right type of insurances to cover break-ins, to cover damage or malicious damage. It's very important you have a good property manager, you have good insurance in Darwin. Right. There is also a reason why some locations like Malden, like Driver and Woodruff are cheaper than other locations within Palmerston City because there's a lot of public housing within and around the area and you want to be avoiding it as an investor. The last thing we want to be doing is buying next to or near public housing because it will affect our house price. And for those investors who are getting caught in the hype and thinking Darwin is going to be the next Perth or Darwin's going to be the next Townsville, I want you to take a step back. I want you to think about your goals. I want you to think about your future and look at the data and zoom out of the data and really think, okay, am I a long-term investor? Does this suit my pathway? Does this suit my trajectory? Is this a good location to invest in? Or should I go into a place like Edmonton? Or should I go into a place like Melbourne where the yields are worse, but I'm buying in a safe location? And another quick tip for you investors out there, when you're looking at places to invest into, you shouldn't be looking at an individual suburb in isolation. You should consider your budget, your risk profile, your strategy, and then you should start looking at suburbs side by side. And you have to ask yourself, okay, am I a short-term investor who's looking for quick capital growth? I want to get in, get out. Then Northern Territory might be a good place for you to go invest into because the yields are a lot better. You have a better entry price point. You have quick short-term equity that you know is happening at this very point in time. Or are you the long-term investor who wants to buy in a capital city, who wants to buy in a safe location, where the price point might be a bit higher, but the yields are a bit less? Then Melbourne might be the location for you to go invest in. But what I wanted to do was to raise all these points for you as an investor so that you can go in and make your own calculated decision about whether or not you want to invest into this location or not. Now, if you're wondering why I'm talking about Darwin so late, it's almost the end of October and I'm only talking about Darwin now. I've actually talked about Darwin at the end of October, so a month earlier. And if you were subscribed to my newsletter, then you would have known about it, right? I have about 400 investors and more on my newsletter. It's completely for free. Go and subscribe. It will only benefit you. And I go super into detail about each suburb, each location, the metrics behind it, the economic diversity, the merger projects, what's good, what's bad, and my ultimate verdict as well. Now, just before I close off this video again, if you are looking for that tailored advice, that community, make sure you are subscribed to the under 450k community where we give you specific knowledge, specific tips, insights, and different strategies into the market. There are free early content, there's exclusive content, there's weekly community calls, and there are so many people finding value already to it. And for just $35 a month, $1 a day, you're getting so much information that it's only beneficial towards you. The ROI is just insane. Now, if you did enjoy this video and if you have any questions, thoughts, comments below, if you disagree with my opinions, put them down in the comments below. Till next time, thank you.